Well, thank you guys for being here today to join us. The session is called Teaching and Evaluating Digital Literacy for Home-Based Learning. So to start with, if you guys wouldn't mind just writing a brief summary in the chat of why you decided to join this session or what your experience is with homeschooling. So if you're a homeschooling parent or a former homeschooler or just interested in the topic, I'd love to hear about it. And while you guys do that, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I was interested in this conference partly because I was homeschooled when I was growing up, and I felt like I was computer literate. I enjoyed creating websites and coding, but I've since learned that there are manageable ways to examine website and media credibility. The homeschooling parents or other teachers can teach K through 12 students, and we'll definitely go into some of those soon. After college, I became a teacher and a librarian. So I've taught middle school classes and college courses and found that students, even in the college level, are still missing some foundations. So my hope is that if we can teach our K through 12 students some key elements, they'll be more than prepared for the college level and could be active learners on a daily basis. So let me go ahead and look at your responses. See your homeschooling and ran a consortium that included an interest group for homeschooling parents. So it's great that we have a bit of a range here. So to start with, I want to approach the subject of digital literacy by discussing the foundations or the aspects of digital literacy, and then we'll delve into some applications for homeschooling. And there's many definitions of digital literacy. The one that I chose, which I'm partial to, of course, as a librarian, is from the ALA Digital Literacy Task Force. And their definition is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, requiring both cognitive and technical skills. And digital literacy has evolved from computer literacy. So where computer literacy focused on traditional computer software or using desktops or laptops, digital literacy is a broad range of digital devices, such as smartphones, tablets, laptops, desktops, all of which are seen as network rather than computing devices. And I would suggest the difference is that digital literacy is based on network rather than standalone devices. Some of them are represented here on the slide. People have the ability to not only communicate with technologies, but create and modify. And there is a great 2006 text, The Landscape of Digital Literacy, and Alan Martin wrote that, quote, "Digital literacy is a condition, not a threshold." So as we all know, we're never done learning in any field, but in the digital or technological realm, this is especially true because technology is always evolving. We certainly know that there's media today that wasn't in existence or wasn't utilized 10 or 20 years ago, so we have to find new ways to measure these mediums. And digital literacy is subjective and it's highly contextual. So to take the definition and others that we talked about or will talk about and use it in your own curriculum, we have to break it down to more narrow categories. And I've found some research from FutureLab, from MediaSmart, of course ALA, and they all discuss it in different groups. So I wanted to look at several of those and kind of delve into them a little bit more. So e-safety, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, cultural and social understanding, and functional skills. And I'm going to start with this category, then I'll move into critical thinking because they really overlap. And I'm sure as I'm talking about the categories, you'll see that all of them really overlap and connect with one another. But E-safety is basically defined as staying safe while using digital technologies and understanding what is appropriate use and content. So this should be the foundation of what we talk about with our students or with our children. Before you do anything else, let your child know what they can and cannot post online. Talk to them about using wireless in public areas, or define what cookies are. If they buy items online, teach them how to assess a website for safety. If they have smartphones, remember that not all apps are created equally. There's certainly quite a bit available online right now, and available through iPhone or Android stores. You may want to consider suggesting a nickname to use when creating new accounts so your children aren't easily searchable. One thing to consider is that safe search will only do so much, especially if kids know the right words to type in, or sometimes they mistype to a bad spelling typo. And there's a lot of search engines built for young children, like FactMonster or KidsClick. KidsClick was created by librarians, actually. And from my experience, they do tend to be a little limited sometimes, just because they're not searching sometimes a worldwide web. And older homeschoolers may not like the very kid-friendly appearance. So if you know of any search engines that you use or that you'd recommend, please feel free to type them into the chat box or suggest them later on. I would love to hear about them. And for many children or young adults, having a password or activity tracker on the internet may be necessary, especially if they're not physically supervised. Another consideration is that today anyone can create a social media account. Today we have the term catfish based on the TV show that highlights this problem. So one suggestion I have is to find a fake profile or a real one and use it as an example with your child. So ask questions, how long has the profile been in existence? Where else has it been used? Many people today have brought online existence and have accounts on more than one platform. So you can easily check to see if a person has multiple accounts. If you use Firefox, you can use the extension Identify, or if you have Chrome, you can download the extension HoverMe to see where else their profile exists. You can also research images to see where else they appeared. So you can reverse Google image search an image to find other locations where it's been used. And in case you're not familiar with those last two that I mentioned, I have some screenshots here of how they appear in use. The first one, HoverMe, is available through the Google Chrome extension store. It allows you to hover over a Twitter handle or other social media, and it'll come up with a list of links where the profile exists or possibly exists. And then the second half of the page, you can see the reverse Google image search. So going to Google Images, you can search by image URL, or you can even upload a photo, and you can search for it, and it'll show up sizes, what other pages it exists on. And next, we're going to talk about critical thinking, which is being able to question, analyze, and evaluate digital media, interpreting the results for everyday life. The first one, the error level analysis, coincides with Google image search, which is why I mention it. It's also abbreviated as ELA. And using a website like photoforensics.com, which is FOTO forensics, you can search or upload an image and determine if it's been edited, which is another fast way to see if someone is trying to trick you online. One of my favorite tools to use as a librarian when I teach information literacy is the website for the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. And you'll see an image on the right-hand side of your screen with what this appears to be. Ask your child to look at the website and really examine it. Ask them questions like, who is the author? How do you know their credibility? If you do a Google search or any search engine search for the tree octopus, what results come up? Does it show up anywhere else? And it's a really good example of how a website can look legitimate and appear credible but is completely false. Also, remember to use Google correctly. I'm often surprised by how many students I talk to, especially in my line of work as a reference librarian, when I'm trying to assess what they've done to search for articles or to search for topics. And oftentimes they just input a couple of keywords. And I think that we get used to seeing kids with phones and computers at such a young age that sometimes we overestimate their web searching abilities. So here are a few things I want to touch on quickly. Sometimes we can't think of the right synonym for searching keywords. This happens to all of us. So using a tool can find similar keywords to the ones that you select. Instead of using a site search box, which can also be kind of limited, Google can work just as well. So if you want to find all Wikipedia articles that mention Cleopatra, you could use this method. This would have some benefits to it, since sometimes a casual mention of Cleopatra wouldn't come up in a search result. You can also search a type of website. So using the site .gov or edu, your child can quickly find reputable sources. Or you can search for a specific file type. And if you have other tips on how to search better, or other Google tricks that you normally use, please feel free to type them in. I know there's a lot of great tricks out there, and I'm sure that there's a lot that I don't know about as well. Now, creativity can be seen in any example of digital literacy. And as you're creating your own toolkit, certainly think about creative ways that you can teach a lesson, or you can show something to your children or your students. I define it here as thinking imaginatively and using technology to output and represent knowledge in different formats. And again, it could really work in any one of these categories. I just paired it up with collaborative, which is working successfully with others to create and share meaning. If you're involved in a homeschooling co-op or group, you're certainly aware of how this can benefit your children. One example is to revise and repackage a given media so that it's optimized for another platform. When I was growing up, my brother and his friends filmed videos based on books or plays. Students can do something similar. And today they can edit it, they can upload it to YouTube, they can show it to friends and family. There are many ways to get creative with assignments. In a project I did with a college course I taught, can easily be adapted in a homeschooling group for teenagers or other young adults. I asked the students to create a Twitter account if they felt comfortable and did not have one already. And when you're dealing with younger children, of course, always approach the parents first and see how they feel about creating social media. In the college course, all the students felt comfortable with doing this, and most of them had one already. And I gave them weekly topics to research. So students had to research a given topic, find a reputable source, and then tweet the link with a given hashtag. So they're evaluated on the source, and other students could retweet and reply with their opinions. Just make sure that your hashtag is not common, and students will be able to find other responses. Also consider allowing your child to maintain a blog or a wiki with other students, and update the items related to their learning. You can also show them how to edit a Wikipedia page, using, of course, a good source and good information. And then your student can become a part of an even bigger wiki universe with the class project. Many schools and homeschooling co-ops have Facebook pages or blogs to update members on events. And when I was in graduate school, one of my online classes required students to meet up in virtual meeting rooms or on Second Life. This is a way to kind of connect students from one campus to another. And virtual meetings can be a way for homeschoolers to create relationships across the country or across the world. Which also ties into our cultural and social understanding, or being aware of the context in which digital media is created and used. I think that we all get used to using media in a certain way and forget many mediums are originally created for something else. Your Maps app on your smartphone uses the same GPS satellite setup in the early 1990s, and you can also create a project out of a website or a device your child uses, or even one you don't want your child to use quite yet. For teenagers, spending time on Facebook, I would recommend reading the book Accidental Billionaires with them and watching the movie The Social Network. You can then compare the two and their pros and cons between displaying the story in both mediums. Or use this time to introduce a new technology to your child. In a session I attended yesterday, we discussed 3D printers and how many public libraries are utilizing them. A new medium like that could be a good time to research its use with your student and compare the practical uses of today with what it could be used for in the future. And this brings us to functional skills, knowing how to use a range of technologies competently and applying this knowledge to new media. Renee Hobbs, who is a media literacy expert, and you can find a lot of her research online, writes that to fulfill the promise of digital citizenship, Americans must acquire multimedia communication skills and know how to use these skills to engage in the civic life of their communities. So let's think about what technologies your child uses and feels comfortable with. Do they know how to turn on and off a computer, save a paper, change the font, or background on the presentation, take and upload photos, etc.? One thing to consider when assigning a project to a student is its application to other media. How does editing a video on a PC compare to a Mac? Can a student take a photo on a smartphone and upload it not only on social media, but edit it on a desktop or a tablet? And I also want to touch on a point I mentioned earlier, that digital literacy is subjective. I don't think we can draw a line and say that illiterate and literate are two distinct things. When it comes to an ever-changing category, technological literacy will always evolve. There will always be something new to learn, and that's a very exciting idea when you're learning alongside your children. There's an article by Collin and Simpson that quotes, "The creative adoption of new technology requires teachers who are willing to take risks. A prescriptive curriculum, routine practices, and a tight target setting regime is unlikely to be helpful." Well, there are many, many resources to further your knowledge on digital literacy. I've highlighted a few of my favorites. The first one is Common Sense Media, and it rates and evaluates many media for families and ranges the 2 to 17 age group. It has best of lists for games, for apps, books, movies, and more. DigitalLiteracy.gov has tools for educators from what skill you want to teach your child to the topic. Google Search Evaluation has lesson plans from beginner through expert level, and it goes through many more things than what I talked about earlier. On Guard Online has many safety tips for kids and for parents. And the News Literacy Project aims to teach young people how to discern fact from fiction in the news. I particularly recommend the Learn channel, which is on the site, and has videos you can show your kids. And I want to open up the session up for any questions or any things that maybe you guys have done in the past or are doing now. I would love to hear about them. Okay, and if there are no questions, I guess I'll go ahead and conclude the session. Feel free to message me on the Homeschool Conference or tweet me online, and I want to thank you all for joining me today.